Amen. So in Matthew 24, we've seen how we can connect the history of the disciples with the history of the end of the world. And hopefully we've also seen how verses 23 to 27 really belong in the history of the Dark Ages, even though Ellen White's going to apply them to the end of the world, and therefore by inference to the history of the disciples, especially when you go to verses 5 and 11. So I want to come back to our question, which is this generation, but connected to this generation is the subject of all these things. So this is verse 34. And all the things, we had three separate answers. We had all the things was this history, and then someone said all of the things was this history, and the third answer was all of the things were both of these histories. Okay, so the question still is open.
You wanted to speak about elect, sorry.
Yes, I just want to try and wrap this up first before we go to the elect. So which one is it? Is it all of this, just this one, or these two? How are we going to understand what it means when it says all these things? This is verse 34. Maybe we should read verse 34, because there are some people who weren't here when we looked at this. So if someone can read verse 34.
Verily I say unto you, this generation shall not pass till all these things be fulfilled.
So it's all these things that we're looking at, trying to understand where we should be placing that. So has anybody had any more thoughts? Brother Rogers.
Okay. We want to address all these things which is closely connected with us identifying this generation that shall not pass. So I'm going to pick up history 2. I don't know if you have graphically drawn it well.
Say that again.
I'm going to pick up history 2, the one on the board, which begins from the second argument.
This one?
Yeah. So, should I explain why I'm picking that history?
Okay, you're saying it's that one.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, when you read verse 34, it says, "Verily I say unto you." Okay? So there we have, it is Christ saying, and he said to someone, which the Bible identifies as the you. Now if you go back to the previous verse, that is verse 33, the you of verse 34 is the ye of verse 33.
Verily I say unto you, this generation shall not pass till all these things be fulfilled. So you're picking up the you in 34. So likewise ye, when ye shall see all these things, know that it is near, even at the door.
Yeah. So if the you is the same as the you of verse 33, it says, when you shall see all these things. So if you realize that in that verse also we have the these things that we have in verse 34.
So likewise, when ye shall see all these things, know that it is near, know that it is near, even at the door.
So I'm saying that these things of verse 34 is the these things of verse 33.
So 33 says, ye. 34 says you. And 33 says these things. And 34 says these things.
Okay. So when you look at verse 33, it says, so likewise we shall see these things, know that it is near even at the doors. So there it says, it is near even at the doors. For those who have a Bible with a marginal reference, the it there, it is he. The it in verse 33 is he. So when you see all these things, you know that he is near and he is near even at the doors. So verse 33 is addressing the second advent. So that these things will be identifying the signs or the precursors of the second advent, which I'm understanding to begin in verse 29 and not the entire history. And then, connected with my explanation of that is that when you come to the book Desire of Ages, 632, Desire of Ages 632, paragraph 1 and 2, okay, you can read.
Give me a second. (632) paragraph 1 and 2. At the close of the great papal persecution, Christ declared the sun should be darkened and the moon should not give her light. Next the stars should fall from heaven, and he says, learn the parable of the fig tree. When his branch is yet tender and putteth forth leaves, ye know that summer is nigh. So likewise ye, when ye shall see all these things, know that he is near, even at the doors. And she's done the marginal reading for that, which says he, not it. Christ has given signs of his coming. He declares that we may know when he is near, even at the doors. He says of those who see these signs, this generation shall not pass till all these things be fulfilled. These signs have now appeared. Now we know of a surety that the Lord's coming is at hand. Heaven and earth shall pass away, he says, but my words shall not pass away.
So if you read the previous verse, she's going to deal with verse 33, but she's going to apply these things from verse 29, not from the beginning, the way you've been doing. So she's going to pick up the signs, the precursors of the second advent. When we come to the next paragraph, she says Christ has given signs of his coming. He declares that we may know when he is near, even at the doors. He says of those who see these signs. And in verse 33 we have, so likewise when ye see these things. And that's what she's picking up in that paragraph. When she continues and says, he says of those who see these things, this generation. So that these things is the signs which are the precursors of the second advent. So I'm going to pick that second history.
Anyone else?
I don't understand this. Number 3, what do you mean by number 3?
I thought you said that.
Yeah, I want to say, is it the third one? Is it combine number 1, 2, 3, and...
I don't know. When you said it was the disciples' history, and you said it was the end of the world history. And so I just left it at that, as you had said it. I hadn't made any application.
Now, what I want to say in this verse, if you read verse 33, of course, it says,
Which verse?
Verse 33. Yeah, it says, when you shall see all this, okay? This is refers to the disciples, of course, and the same, verse 34, this generation is not pass. So, what I can say on this is, I go with the number 3, because all these were fulfilled between 21 and 70 AD. And that generation that lived in that history saw all these things. That was why we told them, when you see Jerusalem is encompassed by the army, you need to run away. So they saw the witness. And then you can also say this generation refers to 1798 to second Adam. So I go by number 3. All these happened 31 to 17. They also happened 1798 to second Adam. So I go by number 3.
So, if I picked up your argument correctly, in verse 33 when it says ye and 34 says you, you're saying this is the disciples. So, if you went back to 29, immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun, moon and stars are going to do their thing. Where do we see that being fulfilled?
1798.
But you said the disciples.
Not all the signs Christ told the disciples were fulfilled in the destruction of Jerusalem. Not all the signs, because like the darkening of the sun and the moon happened later on in 1798.
Yeah, but it says the way it says ye, you, the disciples. It says when you, the disciples, see all of these things, then you know it's going to happen.
All these minus the darkening of the sun, the false prophet, the false Christ, also are included in all this.
I didn't quite catch what you said. You, the disciples, are going to see all of these things. So, all of the things, including the sun, moon, and stars. How can you just sort of like chop bits out?
You know, all this include the minus, the darkening of the sun and the moon and the falling of the stars. Of course, the history of the disciples, there were full Christ that came in their history.
No, I'm okay with that. I'm okay with verse 5 to 20. Because you're saying verse 5 to 20 is all of these things. They saw all of those things.
Yes.
But if you're going to say, well, it's everything except the sun, moon and stars, and the sun, moon and stars is the critical signs, I've took it out here, it's the signs here before the destruction. You can't ignore this. For this dispensation, it's what they've asked for. They said, give us the sign. And you're saying, well, we'll just ignore that. Because that's what it sounds like. If we were going to do this, if we were going to say Brother Rogers is right, and we take number 2, and we say, well, you're cutting out 3/4 of the chapter, you might say, how can you just chop out 3/4 of the chapter when it says all? So you might argue that's a bad argument to just make it this, but to say that all of these things is everything except these major signs here, to me that would be even a worse argument.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, but I'm just giving you my thoughts on that. If we were to say it's just this, so let's ignore the rest of the chapter, someone might say, well, that's not a good argument. But to take out just these 3 things because you're going to make all of this the disciples' history becomes problematic. We read Acts 1:11. It says, the way the angel says, you're going to see Christ coming back. You saw him leave, he was going to come back the same way. The way that language is given, it seems to say like, you're going to see it. So, if you're going to argue that you can't go into 31 to 70, if you can't go into this history and find the sun, moon and stars, even at some kind of application level, if you can't identify that, then you can't come back into 33 and 34 and says that the you are literally the disciples. You can't do that. And the other problem is, when we were discussing before and Brother Rogers was saying, okay, if you're going to be true to the verses, then if you remember we had that discussion about what does it mean to be true to the verses. So when we think about being true to the verses and we look at verses 21, the tribulation, and then 22, the days. If you're going to be true to those verses, what are the tribulation and the days? Is that short time period of the destruction of Jerusalem? Would that be true to the verses, or is it the 1260? So if it's the 1260, and then you agree, I think, that 33 and 34 is obviously outside of this history, you have to ask, who is 33 and 34 talking to? Who's he actually identifying? Because you've marked the history of 2,000 years now, so he can't be talking to a literal group of people who are literally going to see everything. Because if you're here, you never saw any of this, and if you're here, you're never going to see any of this. If we're going to be true to those verses. If we're going to play the game that Jesus played and make it a singular event, then it is. Then you can say, you are the disciples, it's all going to happen really quickly, all in one event, and then what you're going to be forced to do is find out what a sun, moon and star is. And then you're going to have to make some application, unless we know that there was some kind of eclipse, or, some kind of falling of the stars. I don't know how we'd approach that. We might begin to argue that the sun, moon and stars, like we do with Revelation 8, become the three forms of Roman government, and we're going to see that collapsing sometime in that history. We might spiritualize it away, but that's not the true reading of the passage. Hopefully we agree with that. The true reading is that you've got 1,000-year gap between these two things. So therefore, however we're going to approach whoever the you is, can't be done in a literal fashion to say it's literally the disciples. You can say it's literally the people who are living in this dispensation if you're only going to make it number 2. My brother.
Yeah, I'm going for history too. My reason being, the connection that I see in verse 29 is this. You see verse 29 is ending with a colon. I hope you're there. So, it's ending with colon. It's meaning that the information that we are getting in verse 34 and 35 has a connection of verse 29, because it's we know that verse 29 is the history of the end of the history of the 12 weeks there. So it makes all these things to begin from that point. Maybe let me read something about how I got to that one from the use of the column here. I don't know whether I can read.
Before you do that, tell us the point you're making.
The point I'm making is the column at the end of verse 29 shows to me that it has a connection to all what is being said from 29 up to 30. To 30, yeah, to 31 and 33, because it's ending with a colon.
And if it ended with a full stop, it wouldn't. That's the point you're making? I'm just trying to understand why you're making the point. You're emphasizing the colon. What is the colon teaching us? You're saying colon's teaching us that 29 and 31 are connected.
Yeah.
And if it was a full stop, there wouldn't be such hard a connection. I'm just making sure I understand what you're saying. I'm not saying you're wrong. Is that what you're saying?
There could be a connection if it was ending with a full stop, but it ending with a colon makes it. I don't know how I can make the comparison.
Okay, so you're saying there's a tighter connection when you put a colon than a full stop. Okay. And you want to read something to us?
Yes.
Desire of Ages?
No, The use of column, which is
Oh, okay.
yeah.
Go.
So it's saying in grammar, a point of character form that used to mark a pause greater than that of a semicolon, but less than that of the period. Or rather, it is used when a sense of division of a period is complete, so as to admit a full point, but something is added by way of illustration, or description is continued by additional remark.
Okay. But before you ask your question, I want to ask a question, because we've gone back to 29 and 30. 29, sun, moon and stars, 1780, 1833. It says, and then, when it says and then, what does that and then mean? It means afterwards, or it means at the same time?
Afterwards.
So it says, and then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man. What is the sign of the Son of Man? What is, because that's the sign of his coming, I presume, because they've asked for the sign. He says, after you see the sun, moon and stars, then you're going to see the sign. So what is the sign that they're supposed to see, which comes after the sun, moon and stars? Brother William.
Repeat the question.
So, I've asked Brother William to explain. In verse 30, it says, after you see the sun, moon and stars, I've added the word after, then you'll see the sign of the Son of Man. And then shall all the tribes of the earth mourn. And they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and glory. So I'm just asking, what is the sign? Brother William?
Give a minute, please.
Brother Andrew?
Yeah, let's read Isaiah verse 6:31.
Before you tell me what you think it is, we keep on going back to the spirit of prophecy. So I want to tell you what we think about how these verses work.
The reason why I'm quoting that, because it has made some thoughts, and the thought is she says that Christ fixed the time and the signs of his coming, and then now she gives us the tribulations and the darkening of the moon and the light, and then she also goes further and combines with verse 30.
Okay, you tell me what the sign is. That's what my question is.
So for that reason, I would argue that the signs is the darkening of the sun.
So you're saying 29, sun, moon and stars, powers of heaven, verse 30, the sign of the Son of Man is 29.
Yeah, and 20 and 30.
Yeah, 30 I've just read, the sign of the Son of Man, you're saying that is 29,
Yeah.
not after 29.
No, I'm saying that the signs that are in verse 29 and 30.
it says after the tribulation, after the 1260, then you're going to get the sun, moon and stars, and then 30 says, and then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man. So
Below there's some signs also there, the morning.
I'm not reading the Desire of Ages, I'm reading the Bible. So I want you to explain how you're reading those two verses. When it says, and then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man. You're saying the sign of the Son of Man is the sun, moon and stars? So verse 30 is a repeat and enlarge of 29. It's not sequential, it's not afterwards.
I didn't see that.
Sorry?
I didn't see that.
You didn't say that? Or,
I didn't see that.
but that's what you just said.
No, as in what you just said.
But you said the sign in verse 30 is the sun, moon and stars.
No, verse 29 is where we see the sun darkening. I'm saying
29 is the sun, moon and stars. We agree on that. My question is not that. My question is verse 30. It says, then you'll see the sign. My question is, what is the sign in verse 30?
in verse 30, I didn't consider that, sorry.
But you took us to 631 paragraph 2, which is what deals with that.
Yeah, I didn't thought your question is basing on verse 30.
Okay, so my question is verse 30, what is the sign?
I didn't.
My brother.
I would argue immediately after the tribulation of those days,
Just tell me what the sign is.
the sign is the events of the darkening of the sun, moon.
Okay, so you're saying verse 30 is repeat and enlarge of 29.
Yeah.
Okay. Brother William?
So if you go to verse 30, it will say, and then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven. And my argument is the fact that it is using there, the article there, that is a definite article. So meaning this sign has been given before. They weren't bringing it because of the article, the definite article there.
Yeah, verse 3.
So
Verse 3. I ask a question. When is the sign of thy coming? He says, then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man. Because you want to say the definite article brings you back to verse 29. I could argue it takes you back to verse 3. Verse 3 says the sign of the Son of Man. Definite article. It's already been brought up into this conversation.
but if you go to verse 3, it is a question, what shall be there? So they are asking for them to give them this sign.
Yeah, so you say to me, tell me what the dog is. That's the question. And I say, that is the dog. Definite article, the dog. Something else could have happened before that, but I'm responding to your question. You could cut out all the verses from verse 4 to 28, and he'd answer the question. Tell us what the sign is. He says, then shall the sign appear. I don't know. All I'm saying is I don't think the definite article is a strong argument to help.
Yeah, give me another.
Okay. 1 second. Your hand's up.
I think that's every year the sign will be the clouds of heaven.
So you're saying the clouds of heaven is the sign. So you're saying first the sun, moon and stars, then the cloud.
Yeah.
Brother Rogers.
Okay. I want to agree with him that the clouds. Now I want to give an argument. Now if you do for me a little bit of justice on the board, in verse 30 I see a prophetic chiasm, a mirror.
So
you want to have sign. In some big space, Son of Man. It will be good, Son of Man.
he has to be Son of Man. Okay.
And then, when you go to the second part of the verse, it begins. Now, all these are details. Yeah, I want to pick up then shall the tribes of the earth mourn, and they shall see the Son of Man. So the next part begins with the Son of Man. They shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds. So pick up the clouds. So clouds will run up with the sun.
Is that good? Convinced you? So, did anybody else have their hand up? Anybody else wanted to make a comment?
But I will also try to bring this thought that these events that are happening in verse 29 are happening still in the clouds.
Okay? In the clouds. So but the sun isn't in that's the second heaven. Or you're just saying because you look up?
Yeah.
Okay. My brother, did your hand up? I thought you had your hand up.
But a sign is a token, isn't it?
A sign is a token.
When you ask us, what's the token of the sign of man?
Can't say what's the token of the Son of Man.
Because when you say clouds, that's already is appearing. Yeah. That's right.
You don't have to argue against that. You just tell us what you think.
Verse 29 gives us the token before his appearing.
Okay. So you're saying 30 is repeat and enlarge of 29. Yeah? So when it says and then, that means at that same time, not afterwards. Okay? And you're saying and then means afterwards.
Yeah.
So after you've seen the sun, moon and stars, then you're going to see the sign of the Son of Man. And what happens after that?
The advent.
Sorry?
The advent.
What happens after that?
The morning of the
Sorry?
The morning of the time.
And then. So you're going to place that afterwards as well.
It will depend on the duration. The cloud has appeared, then that will be at the same time they begin to move. But then they will be at the same time.
No, you see the clouds, and then it says. I'm just using the and then in the same way. You're gonna say now and then now means the same time.
Even if it was afterward, it will depend on the duration. They see the cloud, it can be 1 second, and they begin to move.
But it doesn't matter. It just means afterwards, though. Only because you can see your logic starts to get dismantled if you make it afterwards, perhaps. I'm not saying it does, but I don't know why you want to make it a second. If in the first part of the verse, if and then is afterwards, if it's the second after the sun, moon and stars, it's the second afterwards, it's still afterwards. So you see the sun, moon and stars, and then after that, you begin to have some kind of distress. You agree with that? It's a cause and effect relationship.
Why not then the second then to be a cause and effect relationship? The cloud appears, they begin to move.
That's what I said, yeah. It's a cause and effect relationship. One happens after another, they're sequential. So the morning is after the cloud. After the sign. We don't know if it's a cloud or not. You've asserted that your assertion is that it is the cloud. But when you see a sign first, and then you're going to begin to mourn. So you're okay with that? Who had the hand up? Brother William.
Yeah, in verse 30, I want to see, if you look that word and then, And then I think, depending on context, can either be used to mean at that time, the same time, or afterwards. But in this context, the way I'm seeing it, in verse 29, it has given us, and the powers of the heavens, heaven shall be shaken, and then. So for me, I think in that context, it's used after the powers of the heavens have been shaken, and then afterwards, there shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven. So I think in that context, it's after this has been done, after the heart has been shaken, and then afterwards.
After what has been shaken? The heavens.
In verse 29,
yeah, after the powers, yeah.
Shall be shaken,
And then.
colon. So it means whatever is coming in verse 30, colon, the way I understand it, is explaining more of what has happened in. It is like it's giving more information. So I'm saying after the powers of the heavens shall be shaken, and then in that context it means afterward and not at that time. Because and then it can mean either at that time or afterwards. But I'm saying at that context it means afterwards.
Okay, so 30 is after verse 29.
Yeah.
So whatever that sign is, it's not the sun, moon and stars.
Yes.
Yes, it's not.
No.
Just remember, you agree it's not. It's not the sun, moon and stars. We agree?
Yeah.
Okay, so we agree on that. You and I, maybe other people don't. And then it says, and then shall all the tribes of the earth mourn. So all the tribes of the earth are mourning after they see the sign. You agree with that? Then it says, and they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. So, how do you deal with that last part? They're all going to mourn, and they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven.
And they shall know the tribes of the earth. And they, so they are the tribes of the earth.
And they, the tribes of the earth, you telling me that?
Yeah.
Okay.
They are the tribes of the earth. So after they have been given the sign, they mourn and they see now the Son of Man.
So they see a sign. Okay, wait, they have the sun, moon and stars. The powers of heaven are shaken. They see a sign, they mourn, and then they see Jesus coming in the clouds. Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm not understanding that last portion there. I don't think that is the case. You can go to the next level, just see.
Brother Wilson? Pass. On which bit are you passing? Is 30 at the same time as 29 or afterwards?
Afterwards.
You see why you say afterwards?
According to
Say that again? Oh, because of this, you mean? That persuaded you. Does anybody think that 30 and 29 are at the same time? Because I know people thought that before. Put your hands up if you think that when it says, and then shall be the sign of the Son of Man, that sign, let me just make sure I'm reading it, that sign is the sun, moon and stars. Who still believes that? You still believe it?
Because they have another argument from the
Okay, I'm just making sure. So, you still believe it? So,
Repeat your question.
my question is, and then shall they see the sign of the Son of Man. So, that's the first part of 30. Is that a repeat and enlarge of 29? Is the sign that they're seeing in 30 the sun, moon and stars?
yeah.
And there are still people who think that. And there are other people who say it's afterwards. So if it's afterwards, we have to try and work out what it is. Brother Rogers has offered us some kind of logic But before we deal with that, I want to make sure that all of us at least try to come to an agreement whether it's at the same time or not. If it's at the same time, obviously all of this is wrong. If it's different, if it's afterwards, it might be correct. So you tell me why it's at the same time.
I just wanted to read a quote from Grateful Prophecy, 333, paragraph 1.
GC 393. 333.
Can I read it?
I'll read it for the camera. 333, paragraph
1.
In 1833?
Yeah.
The whole paragraph you want read?
Half to
The first half or the second half?
first half.
Okay, so you tell me when to stop. In 1833, 2 years after Muller began to present in public the evidences of Christ's soon coming, the last of the signs appeared which were promised by the Saviour as tokens of his second advent. Said Jesus, the star shall fall from heaven, and John in the Revelation declared as he beheld in vision the scenes that should herald the day of God. The stars of heaven fell unto the earth, even as the fig tree casteth her untimely figs, when she is shaken by a mighty wind. Revelation 6. This prophecy received a striking and impressive fulfillment in the great meteoric shower of November 13th, 1833.
Until there. So, my argument is, you are being given a proof that the last sign of which Christ gave prior to his second advent was the falling of the stars. And this was the last sign. So the sign of his coming, I think, were the moon, the stars, and according to this argument.
So you're saying that the last sign you're ever going to see is the falling of the stars?
Yeah, these were the signs. According to Matthew, these were the signs that will be given to show us that the day is drawing nigh.
I got that. It says the last of the signs appeared which were promised by the Saviour as tokens of his second advent. And you're picking up the phrase, the last of the signs means it's the last sign.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
So I'm going to do it says last of the signs. So that's a quote. And this is 333 paragraph 1. And you're saying that equals the last sign that we will see.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes.
So, Brother Robert, what do you think about that? Trey? You can't see. Have you got the quote in front of you? Or you're doing something else? Have you got the quote in front of you? On your computer? So you go to 333, paragraph 1. 2 years after Miller began to present, I'll leave that. In 1833, the last of the signs appeared, which were promised by the Saviour as tokens of his second advent. So I've just taken that phrase, the last of the signs, and my brother's saying that means it's the last sign that we're going to see. And therefore, if that's the last sign that we're going to see, then in verse 13 it says, and then shall appear the sign. That sign has to be the stars, because that's the last sign that you're ever going to see. So I'm asking you to comment.
I acknowledge what you say from the quote, but I think that the sign in verse 30 is different from the verse.
So what did you say at the beginning about?
I'm seeing his point from the quotation. Why he is.
When you say you see, you mean you agree.
I'm not agreeing, but I'm seeing why he's making that argument.
Okay, so we can all see why he's making the argument, so I'm asking you to comment on this, not on verse 30. I want you to comment on that. I don't want you to use verse 30 to fight against that. I want you to comment on that. Sister Emma.
Quite good argument. Because it also references
That's fine. It also references
the fact that it's as spoken of by Christ.
So if it's a good argument, are you telling me you agree?
No.
It's an argument that you can't fight against.
I'm seeing that it says signs here, but it does still say in the verse sign does. So we can see to distinction between signs and sign.
Like the plural.
It says, there shall appear the signs of some kind. So we're making all those signs one sign now.
I want to go to this. I want to try to avoid going into the 30. 1 second. You need more time?
Yeah.
Okay, so Brother Robert, you had your hand up.
You read verse 30.
I don't want to read verse 30.
Not 30, I mean 29.
I don't want to read verse 29. I want to read this. I want to comment on how he's reading a Spirit of Prophecy quote.
Yeah, that's why.
Yeah, but I don't want to use the Bible verse to counter or defend this. I want to know, is he reading this quote correctly?
I think it's correct when you read it from verses 29, because in verses 29, Christ is going to mention 3 signs.
So, when he says the last of the signs, and he says the last sign that we will see, you agree with that?
Yeah.
So you agree that that's the last sign you're going to see?
Yeah, but this is in verses 29, because in verses 29 there are 3 things that are mentioned: the sun, moon, and stars. So in 1833, this quote is talking about 1833, the stars are the last sign that are given in verse 20, in verses 29. So that's how I'm reading.
So that's how you read this Spirit Prophecy quote. The last of the signs in verse 29 appeared in 1833, and these were the tokens of his second advent. That's how you're reading that. My brother?
Okay. So what I can see from here, that another way I talk about the last of the signs. So I can understand that there are some signs that Christ given before.
Sorry?
You say that there are some signs that Christ given before.
Okay. Christ has given some signs.
Yeah. And then when it comes to verse 29, these are the last signs whereby we have past signs.
Okay. Do you agree it means this?
So the sign that from that point is not that singular, not that it's one of the star. The last sign is from 1880, and then one of the star and other things. Because when you go to verse 9, I'm seeing that verse 9 only 2, and not only 2, but the last say that the power of the heaven shall be sharpened.
I don't understand the point you're making. Sorry.
Okay. My point is this. I'm saying that the last signs are the sign of verse 29, but not singular, not 1833.
But she quotes, she says 1833 and verse 29 in the passage.
So in the passage, what I can argue in the passage, okay, like the last sign, not a singular, but a plural.
The last of the signs was the stars falling in heaven. Isn't that what she says? Yeah?
Yeah.
So my question is that what this means? Does that, what we just read, does it mean it's the last sign that we're ever going to see? I'm going to put ever, because that's what he means.
Yes, someone.
My brother.
Yeah, I think everywhere doesn't mean that at all. I don't agree with that.
At all. Okay? Tell us what she means.
She means that this is the last sign which appeared, but she's not meaning that we will not see now other signs apart from this.
And what's your proof? Or your argument?
Yeah, my argument is when you see the words, the verses commenting on, the verses quoting, is verse 29, and in verse 29 there are signs there. But out of those signs, the last of it was the falling of the stars.
My brother?
I was also there to agree with what Brother Robert and Dickens have said, in that I see this as the last of the signs in verse 29, but we also know that we started this as another sign, which is now the sign of the Son of Man. So, of the signs that we have to see signs that have been listed out in verse 29, but the Son of Man also has a specific sign that appears in his coming. So, other than those signs, we have the sign now, the sign of the Son of Man.
Okay, so what do you think about people's arguments?
We have a point. It's that I wanted clear emphasis.
Sorry? You
I
want?
wanted them to emphasize more, make it clear that the signs in verse 29, it's different from the signs that we see in verse 30. Because I believe majority of us were always combining the verse 29 and 30 as one.
Okay. Are you happy that we can separate them?
Yeah.
And that we can't do this?
Yeah.
I just want Brother Rogers to comment.
Okay, I wanted to say, when we say the last sign that we will never see, so I will ask a rhetorical question, who is the we? But I'm going to say, when you come in the context that she's addressing in Great Controversy, page 333, she's speaking the last in context of verse 29. And in the signs in verse 29 are the signs of habituals that his coming is near. But there is a sign that tells us his coming is here now. Not near, but it's here. And that sign is the sign in verse 30.
So she uses the word signs in this passage, but then she, in the same sentence, then she switches and uses the word tokens of his second advent. So token, even though you might think it's a direct equivalent of sign, I think has a slightly different connotation to it.
Okay. Last of the sign doesn't mean the last sign. That's one thing we should understand. The last sign doesn't mean last.
You just tell us what you understand, don't tell us what we should understand.
When you look at verse,
because I don't want you preaching to my brother and telling him how to read the Bible. You just tell how you read.
So in verse 29, we see there are three signs. But then, as the verse is ending, it says that, and the powers of the heaven shall be shaken. Yeah, we see that's also another sign which has not yet been fulfilled. Yeah. So, but Ellen G. White is so specific that of all those signs, she takes at the falling of the darkening of the sun, of the moon, of the sun, and the moon becoming not giving its light, and the stars falling, has the last sign before the appearing of the Son of Man. But then of all the last signs, she takes one of the signs. That is, they are falling of stars from heaven.
Brother Robert, you had your hand up?
That time what I wanted to say is that verses 29, just as Roger says, are harbingers that the Son of Man is about to come. But the meaning of the word sign in verses 30, when you look at it from how strong she uses it, is like something that tells you that what you've been expecting is now here. So I tend to agree with what Rogers is saying, that verses 29 is giving us the harbingers that Christ coming is about to come, and then verses 30 is the sign that Christ is now here. It's a big difference.
So, does anybody else want to make a comment? One second.
Yeah, I want us to consider the account of Mark and Luke.
Okay. In which verses?
In respect to the sign.
In 29 and 30. So, Matthew 24:29 is Mark 13:24 and 25. So I'll do it here. 24, 13, 21, Luke, Mark, and Matthew. And 29 is 24 and 25. And in Luke, it's 25 and 26. And then if we went to 30, it's 26 and 27. And I put 28 here as well. I put that in parentheses. So which one do you specifically want to look at as, I guess, some evidence or some point that you want to make, because you want to look at them because you're saying that they're going to teach us something slightly different? So maybe I'll make a little bit of comment. In verse 30, so verse 30 it says, "And then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, and then shall all the tribes of the earth mourn, and they so that's the first part. And then it says, and they shall see the Son of Man come in the clouds of heaven with great power and great glory." If you go to 26 and 27, it skips out the first part where it says, "Then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man." That's not in Mark or Luke. All that's in Mark and Luke is, "Then shall they see the sign." So the Son of Man come in the clouds of heaven. And I think they're virtually identical. So I'm going to rub that out, but I'll redraw it first. I've got 30A and 30B. And 30B is 26 and 27, and there is nothing there. Does that make sense? I've split 30 into two parts. First of all there's the sign, and then the mourning, the sign in the morning, and then it says, "And they shall see the Son of Man." And in these ones, it says, both of them say, "and then." So 26 and 27 say, "and then." And it doesn't say, it just says, "and they." Hopefully that makes sense. So when you go to Mark and Luke and it says "and then," you need to go tie back to the previous verses. So we'll do that. So again here, 29 is going to cover two verses from each of those two chapters. So if I go to Mark, it says, "But in those days, after that tribulation, the sun shall be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light, and the stars of heaven shall fall." And I think Matthew, Mark, and Luke are virtually all identical for that part. Hopefully we agree with that. I know it's hard to flip back and forth. So for the sun, moon, and stars, they're all saying the same thing. And then Luke adds some extra information. The extra information is not in Matthew or Mark. This is Luke 21:25. "And upon the earth, distress of nations with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring." So I'll read Luke. Then shall be the sign of the sun, the moon, and the stars, and upon the earth distress of nations with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring. So, if we were to line that up, where would we line that verse 25 up with? I'll read the beginning part of verse 26. Men's heart failing them for fear and for looking after those things which are coming on the earth. The complexity is, the last part of 26 says, for the powers of heaven shall be shaken. And the powers of heaven being shaken are tied into verse 29 of Matthew 24 and verse 25 of Mark. So, what do you want to say about all of that? Because you want us to look at this.
No, I was just wondering, that's why I brought it up, because in verse 25 of Luke, it makes us to understand that from verse 25 it's now the sign. And then when it comes to now, verse 27, of which in Matthew it says, verse 29 of Matthew says the signs of his coming, it doesn't say again the sign. He put the signs up in verse 25 of the book. So I was just wondering, so I thought I should bring it, maybe we can.
Let me ask one question. In 29, it says the sun, moon and stars, it says the powers of the heavens shall be shaken. Is the shaking of the powers in heaven, is that the sun, moon and stars, or is that something else?
No,
it's different? So, okay, so we're not even agreeing on that. Is the shaking of the powers the same or different? So some people are saying the same, some people are saying different. If you go to Luke 25 and 26, how does Luke describe it? If you read Luke, you've got the sun, moon and stars, and then it says, and on the earth distress of nations, with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring, men's heart failing them for fear, and for looking after those things which are coming on the earth, for the powers of heaven shall be shaken. Is that saying the same?
Yes.
Everybody agree? No, actually we don't all agree. We're all saying something different. I don't know what we're all agreeing on. What's the powers of heaven in Luke? Is that the sun, moon and stars, or is that afterwards? Okay, so we're all reading the Bible differently. Brother Robert, how are you reading? You're not reading? You can't read what? You can read.
In the verse, they seem to be the same. But with some background information about what Sister It says, like,
with some background information
of what Sister It says about these powers of heaven.
Okay, so you're going to use some background information. She's going to say something different.
Yeah, I'm saying when I look at it from the verse, it seems to suggest that the sun, moon, and stars are the powers of heaven. But with the preconceived idea that I have from Sister White, I kind of now remain there.
Brother?
Okay, for me, I have an idea about the last of the signs to be the stars, the falling of the stars. That was the last sign. And then Christ will introduce a parable where this generation should learn of the parable of his coming. That will be the sign is the sign that he will introduce for his coming. It's the sign of the parable to the summer that is seen.
Is that in verse?
But that parable comes 2 verses later.
So, what I can say, because what you have said is mingling is legally, so it is for us to break and see, we arrange in sequential. Because this review and herald.
So we go to review and herald, a different place now.
This review and herald.
All I'm asking is the powers in Luke, the sun, moon and stars. You're directing me somewhere else. You're saying it is, and your evidence is?
So, I'm saying the powers, because what has led us to this point is the last of the signs, so that we can identify.
Okay. Who had the hand up at the back?
To me, the powers of heaven is the same like the sun, moon, and stars. Because if you're going to say they are all the same, then another question that I'm going to pose is, what are these powers of heaven? You understood me? I'm saying the powers of heaven is the moon, the sun, moon, and stars. But if you're going to say that there is a different thing, then another question that I'm going to ask is, what are these powers of heaven if they are not part and parcel of the moon, stars, the sun, moon, and stars?
Tell me how you read verse 25 and 26 in Luke. It says, sun, moon and stars, and upon the earth distress of nations. And then verse 26 says, men's heart failing them for fear, and for looking after those things which are coming on the earth, for the powers of heaven shall be shaken. So tell me what that means. Paraphrase that verse.
So to me, Luke 21 says, and there shall be signs in the sun and in the moon and in the stars, and upon the earth visitors of creation. So verse 26 is repeated in verse 25. So the moon, the sun, the moon and stars is equal to the earth. So it's going to use also what we call prophetic miracle.
So you're saying sun, moon and stars, and then you're going to say distress.
Of nation.
This is 25, and then 26 you're going to say men's hearts failing because of the powers of heaven.
No, I think instead of distress you put earth.
Instead of
Distress of the nations. I put
So we have the sun and the moon and the stars. Some things happening in heaven. Then we have some things happening on earth.
Okay, so I'll put earth here. You want distress of nations. So that's what I meant. So the men of earth, or men on earth. Yeah? Is that? You want me to read?
Let's make it simple by putting the first place earth instead of distress.
Here.
The nations are in the earth.
And upon the earth. So you just want to put earth and earth.
So you have then the other side parts of heaven.
So you're saying it's repeating in large.
And we see Christ.
Everybody agree with that? Yeah? Everybody okay with that? Yeah?
I had a question, of which I agree with the verse 29 and 30, and first I want to read something from the Desire of Ages.
Before we do that, I just want to tie up this, making sure we agree with that.
No problem with that.
So if we agree with that, we're saying that the powers of heaven are the sun, moon and stars. And therefore, if we come back into 29 and Matthew, this one, and these two, then are we going to say the same thing, that the powers of heaven are the sun, moon and stars? So the only problem is Brother Robert's got a Spirit of Prophecy quote that says otherwise.
Okay, yeah. What it says otherwise is when these powers of heaven will be shaken. Because this sun, moon and stars, I think, if I was understanding correctly, they were being suggested what is happening around the history of 1833. But I think this is now going to happen in the future, in chapter 21 of Luke, verses 26. It's something that will happen in the future, but it's still the sun, moon and stars.
So you're going to get verse 29 and not just make it 1798, you're going to make it a future event.
That is in Matthew. You in Matthew?
Well, okay, so I'm asking, are you saying Luke 26 is not going to line up with Matthew 29?
It's going to line up, but I'm saying, according to Sister White, now she says that the sun, moon and stars will be shaken in the future.
Yes.
Okay, so that is what I'm saying. She's saying that the Bible is what was tricky to me, but I'm seeing the point that it is the sun, moon and stars.
Okay, let he read his.
Okay, I was.
You got a question, you said?
I had to emphasize something first, then I ask a question. When you read Isaiah of Pages 631, paragraph 2, it says that the Savior gives signs of his coming, and more than this, he fixes the time when the first of these signs shall appear. Immediately after the tribulation of those days shall the sun be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light, and the stars shall fall from heaven, and the powers of heavens shall be shaken, and then shall appear the Son of Man in heaven, and then shall the tribes of the earth mourn. So, I understand that the falling of the stars, moon, and the darkening of the sun, they were signs that were to show that he is coming, but there was this sign, specific sign of the coming of the Son of Man. But now when I go to Great Controversy, page 334, it says that, 334 paragraph 8, it says that many who witnessed the falling of the stars looked upon it as an herald of the coming judgment. So, my question is, does it mean that the Millerites misunderstood these signs as in they looked at these signs of verse 29 as the sign of the coming of the Son of Man?
Well, the Great Controversy statement says they looked at it as heralds, which we might use the word harbingers, that these are the tokens that are telling you that his coming is near. And is that any different to the Desire of Ages passage?
No, my question was, did they have any misunderstanding, or they understood that these different signs of verse 29, there is still another sign of the Son, of coming of the Son of Man? Because I think I've read somewhere where Miller says that if these signs are fulfilled, then the Son of Man is coming. So he sees them as the sign themselves, as the sign that Christ promised that I am coming.
I'm not sure if they made the mistake. I don't know if they're going to go into the detail that we're going in and splitting that the sign of the Son of Man is something extra or additional to the sun, moon and stars. That's your question. Yeah. What did the Millerites think? I'm not sure. Brother Rogers.
Okay, I think Brother Robert has left, but the dilemma was we are going to Luke 21, verse 25, verse 26, and he asked a question like, what are the powers of heaven in that case? It was like, if you look at the verse, it seems to suggest as if the powers of heaven are the powers of earth. But he said that based on a preconceived idea that he has from the spiritual prophecy, she says powers of heaven are not powers of earth. But I think the point he was trying to bring up agrees with what has already been laid on the board based on repeat and enlarge and prophetic chiasm. Because now it really lines up the powers of heaven to be the sun, the moon, and the stars.
If you go to verse 25 and 26, even though we've got a chiasm like this is 1798. We agree with that? Just because this is 1798, it doesn't mean this is 1798. Even in the verse itself, it doesn't necessarily mean that. I don't think. Because when you have a chiasm, you can do things with chiasms. Say if we do a chiasm of 742 and we get to 1863. Everybody familiar with that? Anybody not familiar with that? So we all agree. Just because we've got a chiasm, is this event the same as this event? They're the same event. Civil war, north and south. The rejection by the king, the leader. They're identical. But just because they're identical doesn't mean they're not separated by 2,500 years of history, and they're totally separate events. So just because we have a chiasm here, it doesn't mean that this is 1798. It doesn't have to be 1790. It might be, but it doesn't have to be 1798.
I think the point it's trying to identify is that the sun, the moon, and the stars are the powers of heaven, but not necessarily identifying that the shaking of the powers of heaven happens at 1798.
Yes.
It helps us clarify that point.
So we know that the powers of heaven, if you go back to Genesis, we know that it's the sun, moon, and stars. We already know that. And just because they're getting shaken here, it doesn't mean that this is 1798. And if that's the case in Luke, my argument is you'd apply it the same in Matthew and Mark. So in Matthew and Mark, let's stick back to Luke before we do that, because they're going to make an argument. In Luke it says sun, moon, and stars in heaven. It doesn't say in heaven, but I'm saying that's in heaven because it's going to contrast what's happening on earth. There's something in heaven and there's something in earth. That's 25. You agree with that? Sun, moon, and stars, and upon the earth, the distress of nations. There's something happening in the heaven, there's something happening on the earth. Two separate things. And then it says in verse 26, men's heart failing them because they're scared, and for looking after those things. What does it mean for looking after those things? I don't know why it sticks the word after. We wouldn't say that. Sorry?
Distress of looking at.
Looking at?
The distress of nations.
No, but why did it say looking after? We would never say that in normal English. So I think it means looking at. And I want to suggest the reason it says afterwards, because it's saying looking at the things that are going to happen afterwards. I think that's what it's trying to suggest. Looking after those things which are coming on the earth. So that's why it puts it afterwards, because they're not here yet. There's things that are going to happen afterwards on the earth. For the powers of heaven shall be shaken. So people got confused. I think that's what the point that I think both Brother Rogers spoke about it explicitly. Brother Robert he alluded to it. It's a statement that Bates has made, that he's going to talk about the heaven and the earth as all things that are happening on the earth. So what he's going to do is he's going to spiritualize for the powers of heaven shall be shaken and make that some earthly shaking. And she says, no, heaven is heaven and earth is earth. But the way I'm seeing verse 26, I don't know how you're seeing it, is when it says, and look in, so we've had the sun, moon, and stars, we've had the distress of nations, and then men's hearts are failing because they're looking at some future things that are going to happen. And those future things are going to be coming on the earth. Sorry? Which is going to have some fear, because the powers of heaven are going to be shaken. And I'm saying those powers of heaven that are shaken are a future event, as are the things that are coming on the earth, future events. And she's going to tie up and to say, don't conflate heaven and earth in verse 26. They're two separate things, but they're both future things. Are we okay with that? Yes. it sustains the chiasm that we've got here. So it's not in opposition to the chiasm, but it's saying that this is 1798 and this is future. And it's also going to be saying, I'm going to suggest that this is past and this is also future. I'm not guessing at, because it says, men's hearts failing them for fear and for looking after those things which are coming on the earth. They haven't come yet, they're still coming. So this is past and this is future. So 25 is past, 26 is future. When I mean past, I mean at this reflection point. Hopefully that makes sense. Does anybody have any questions, or they disagree, or we agree with that? Just in the Luke portion, because then it's going to impact how we're going to see Matthew and Mark.
Just want to remind you, you said you wanted to talk about it.
Yes, but we're going to do it in the next class because we're going to run out of time. I didn't think this was going to take us long. Does anybody want to comment on that, or they disagree or agree? Okay, I want to just tidy this up first, because I want to just tidy up some loose ends before we finish the class. Can everybody see the repeat and enlarge? This is repeat and enlarge. It's a special type of repeat and enlarge because it's a chiasm. We agree with that? Okay, so if we agree with that, then if it's the sun, moon and stars, it must be the sun, moon and stars. And therefore you know that the powers of heaven in Matthew and Mark must be the sun, moon and stars. Do we agree with that? Because that's what chiasms do for you. They allow you to interchange things. So if we're okay with that, we've got a distress of nation. I'm saying this is in connection with this somehow, but there's a future distress of nation. Are we okay with that? So if we've done that, are we all in agreement that these are future and these are past? So if we agree with that, let's come back into 24, 29, this one. It says sun, moon and stars, that's this. And then it says, and the powers of heaven shall be shaken. And if we line the verses up, the powers of heaven that are shaken in 29 must be the powers of heaven that are shaken in verse 26. Do we agree with that? So I've got 29a and 29b. And 29b is the powers of heaven which line up with the powers of heaven in 26. If we agree with that, then 29 is 1798. 29a. 29b is something future. And then 30 is something afterwards. So 30, the sign, has to happen after this future event here. If you can see that, then that's a proof to know that 30 and 29 is not at the same time. It's not a repeat. And therefore the sign in verse 30 can't be the sun, moon and stars. Because between the sun, moon and stars and the sign in 30, you've got another event that's about to occur. And that event has not occurred in this history, it's a future event. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So once you do that, we haven't read the Spirit of Prophecy quote, so I'm going to say it from memory, correct me if I'm wrong. When she applies the shaking of the heavens, which is the sun, moon and stars, she's going to make it as a future event. And I think she does that in the plagues. And we'll jump ahead now. After the plagues, what's going to happen during the seventh plague? What do you see?
The shaking.
Yeah, after that, no, that's what's going to happen. After those plagues, then what do you see? You see the sign of the Son of Man. And the sign is you see the cloud. She talks about that. So, we cheated a bit because we went to Spirit Prophecy, we didn't read it, so we jumped ahead. But I want us to see that how we can break down these verses And if you do it carefully, you don't actually need that much spirit prophecy guidance. The verses are self-contained and they teach you all of these things if we read carefully. It's important that we bring the 3 chapters together, because if you don't, you get into problems. Because otherwise, I would have said 29, sun, moon and stars, the heavens is a separate event. But you would have said, how do you prove that? And it becomes hard to prove it. Then I may have gone to the Spirit of Prophecy quote that Brother Roberts mentioned. But if you go to Luke and you see this chiasm, and the way verse 26 reads, you can see that they're future and separate events. And the fact that you make it a chiasm ties it together. So we've run out of time and it's a bit late because we haven't had breakfast. So I won't summarise. We'll try and summarise tomorrow. I do prefer to summarise. We're getting closer to understand what all means. We still want to work out what the all means, and I still want to address the elect, and we still need to tidy up what the generation is. So we've got some loose ends that we want to tidy up. But hopefully, even if we haven't come to any conclusions, it's helped us to see how to read Scripture more carefully, that we shouldn't assume things. Reading the Spirit of Prophecy, sometimes we can get things wrong, like the last of the signs doesn't mean it's the last sign that we're ever going to see. We have scriptural evidence that shows that's not the case. That if we can line up Bible verses, it's helpful. Even if we didn't, we can see in the verses, if we just had 29, I think there's strong argument to say that 29a and 29b are 2 separate things. The shaking of the powers of heaven is not 1780 and 1833. It's a separate event. We could see it through the chiasm of this, that verse 30 is afterwards. So hopefully it's been interesting how to read Scripture, and it's just another reminder that we need to read carefully. Think about what we've studied. If there's anything that we didn't understand, or have read too fast, or have confused us, we'll come back tomorrow morning and we'll tidy up any confusion. If I've skipped something, if I've done something wrong, or you have concerns, I want to go over that, because I want all the class to be happy that we're all on the same page. Because when we start coming to conclusions that actually materially affect us, we need to come back to a place that we all agreed on. Otherwise, we'll get into problems. Okay? Let me tell you where we're going and why, as we're doing this, it becomes relevant to me. Ellen White talks about this generation, and I'm suggesting, she says this generation is 1798 to the Second Advent. It's some spiritual generation. And if you do that, we don't have any history. We don't even exist. We agree with that? There's no final generation. There's no judgment of the living. Ellen White doesn't have any visibility on that. She just says it's this final generation. And so when she does that, when she starts giving all these time-setting quotes, which generation is she speaking to? This generation. This generation has no visibility about time-setting. What we are doing in our movement is we're creating a brand new generation, a generation that Ellen White doesn't talk about. And so I'm seeing this as a defense and an argument to start exploring how Ellen White talks about time setting, and the legitimacy for us to talk about time setting. It's going to be carried on the back of the concept of what a generation is, because Ellen White doesn't understand the generation in the way that we do. That's why I want to make sure that all of this is in place and we all agree of how we create a generation, how we create what all these things are. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we give you praise and thanks for your goodness and mercy. Help us, Lord, to meditate upon the words of life that we have read this morning, that they may strengthen us through this day. We ask for a blessing upon the food. In Jesus' name, Amen.